This is Design Safe Radio, where natural hazards researchers strive to make our society more resilient to everything nature throws at us.
All right, hello. Welcome to another episode of Design Safe Radio. I'm your host, Dan Zahner, and I'm really happy to see my colleague and friend from North Carolina, Stephanie Pilkington, back again. Good to see you again, Stephanie.
Good to see you, Dan.
For those who haven't listened to your previous episodes, can you quickly introduce yourself and talk about what you do within the Structural Engineering Extreme Events Reconnaissance Network, which after this, we're going to just call it StEER, because that's a very long acronym.
It is. So, hi, everyone. My name is Stephanie Pilkington. I am an assistant professor at the University of North Carolina at Charlotte. I'm a structural engineer by training, and I focus on natural hazards and their impacts to communities. And as part of the Structural Extreme Events Reconnaissance, or StEER network, I serve on the Wind Advisory Board. And so that means I focus largely on, say, tornadoes or derechos or hurricanes and look for events with extreme wind damage.
What is a derecho? I vaguely remember what that is, and some people listening may not know what that is.
Yeah, so a derecho, I knew as soon as I said that word.
It's a really fun word to say too.
Right? A derecho is a extreme straight line wind event. And what I mean by that is that a tornado has rotating winds, and a derecho will have winds going out in one direction. And so a derecho, typically how they look on radar, it kind of looks like a bow.
Okay.
Like a boomerang, almost looking. And right at the leading edge of that kind of boomerang shape is where you have the strongest winds. And those winds can get pretty significant. There's been a couple in the past few years. One that went through Ohio, I think 2-3 years ago, maybe. And that front line of wind can go over in excess of, say, 60 miles per hour for wind.
So you're part of StEER. What is that group? What's the mission of that, and why is that important?
So StEER is a group of engineers, researchers from both university and from industry. And so this group basically serves as this large network across the world, heavily concentrated in the US, but across the world as well. And the whole point is that we have this network so that when an extreme event hits, be it an earthquake, be it a tornado, a hurricane, a tsunami, we have a network of qualified individuals who can go out, gather data, and assess possible structural failures and successes. And so we can learn more and collect that data moving forward.
Wow. So let's say it sounds like you don't necessarily have to be a professor or have a PhD, but just have some sort of interest and expertise to get involved.
Yeah, so we have we usually do actually bring a number of grad students with us whenever we deploy. So we also have a number of people who are part of the network who are from like Simpson Strong Ties. So these are the people who make hurricane ties for your roof. And so they come out with us as well. And we might have people from other industries that might not have, you don't need a PhD to do it. You just have to have some sort of background in it, or background in data science is the other one we recommend to be part of StEER.
Awesome. So as a new person, like if someone's listening to this and like, wow, that sounds great, like how would they learn about that and get involved?
Yeah, so their website, so just steer.network, has a lot of information on how you can be involved, types of products that StEER puts out. And the main thing for being involved is just to reach out to us. We're always looking for new members. It always helps to have a very robust group of people so that we can send it out, because a number of times an event might happen and we can't have the whole network dispersed. We don't have, all the same free time, or available time, I should say. And so having that robust network is really beneficial to us. So anytime you reach out to someone or fill out the application that's on the website, we're pretty responsive to that.
Yeah. And from what I've seen, I'm part of the StEER network as well, and I, as the NCO here, just to when I can, right? It's not very often, but to be involved in some of the virtual assessments and things like
Yep.
that. It's been really interesting to see people from literally all over the world who are part of
Yes.
StEER. So you don't necessarily even have to be a researcher in the US. And in fact, it's advantageous. Like, let's say you live in Turkey and are able to respond
Would be
when
really
a big
helpful
event
right
like that
now.
happens. It'd be really helpful. Yeah. So
Yeah.
it's really great to hear that there's a low barrier to entry, and if you're interested in have some even a little bit of skill, then it's a great network to be a part of.
Yeah, and we usually start out, there's different levels to your membership. And so you could start out as level 1 and you work up. And the level 1 means you start off being involved in what we call virtual reconnaissance. And so we put together, as you mentioned, these virtual assessments where we gather all this data from social media, from news outlets, from an event, and kind of synthesize it into a report. And it lets us see what are the patterns, what are we seeing for what failed, and we also put it into context of the hazard. So we outline the hazard a bit in that as well. And those are made available to people so you can look back and see, okay, well, from this event, these were the major findings. And this is what StEER recommended for future research, or if a additional in-person kind of reconnaissance is required. And usually we start you out with those virtual ones, so it helps you kind of get an understanding for the whole process. And then we don't send you out on your own. You go with different leveled members, and that's really nice because you end up learning a lot from those people.
Yeah, and some of the people that are involved, I mean, all of them have really great levels of expertise, and they're all interested in building a good team and teaching others how to be part
Yes.
of that and bringing you along. So it's not like you're just going to be thrown in the deep end and expected to swim. It's a really welcoming team that's focused on bringing each other up.
Oh no, they're awesome. I mean, I joke I learned from, as we jokingly call them, the Davids. Yeah.
Yes.
Dr. David Pravat and Dr. David Roosh. And actually, the first reconnaissance I went out on with Dr. David Roosh, I actually kind of followed him around with everything to kind of understand, okay, well, what are we looking for when we look at these buildings? And I learned so much from doing that with him.
Mm-hmm. We should get a T-shirt with the Davids on it.
The Davids.
StEER Network, come join the Davids. So,
maybe automatic entry if your first name is David.
Yeah, absolutely. Come join the Davids. So let's talk about some of the details of one of these deployments. Either that first one with David Roosh or an example of one more recently. Like, what does that timeline look like? What are some of the steps? Like, how do you decide to actually conduct a reconnaissance mission and select the team and all that stuff?
Yep. So one of the reasons actually we stood up, or the directors, I should say, so the Davids, Tracy, Muhammad, Ian, everyone stood up. The Wind Advisory Board, the Coastal Advisory Board, the Earthquake Advisory Board, is to help us decide the timeline and like what events we're going to go out for. And so part of the advisory board is to help make those decisions. And what that usually starts with is if we think something is significant enough to do a virtual reconnaissance. And that means, again, we go in and we look at Twitter posts. So yes, your Twitter and your Instagram, we stalk that for damage pictures.
We stalk it for science.
It's for science. So we go and we gather that kind of information and we compile it and we do like a kind of high level look at the structural failures. And sometimes from those virtual assessments, we can then say, okay, well, I think we want more detail in this area because there seems to be a pattern here that we haven't captured before. For example, in that first trip that I went on with David Roosh, one of the things that we looked at was there were a lot of new construction houses that were impacted. This was a Nashville tornado back in 2020.
Oh, I remember that one.
Yeah. And so we wanted to check out some of these neighborhoods that were new construction. and because we hadn't had that in our data sets before. And so that was that. We also had some interest in historical buildings because it hit Nashville, and we had some interest in how those historical buildings functioned.
Right.
Because those have a little bit of different building behavior since they're not often up to code, because it's so difficult to get those to code. So, we look at each event and we kind of see, okay, what can this add to our overall knowledge base of how buildings fail or how they succeed also?
So when you had that, that Nashville tornado incident, like, how do you plan out where you're going to go and get the travel there and logistics? I mean, there's a lot of things that go into getting a team there and ready to collect data and report on that. Can you tell me a little bit about that?
I can tell you a little. I will say David Roosh did a lot of that planning for that one. And it seems to involve a lot of working with the local municipalities, their local police department, local EM. Sometimes we have to coordinate with FEMA. There's usually, to get into some areas that are especially devastated, we have to go and check in with a centralized EM area where we check in, we tell them where we're going, we get clearance so that we can get past, say, a barricade, because sometimes they try and keep people out, because you don't want just people coming in to, look and snoop at people's destroyed homes. So it takes a level of coordination with them, and sometimes we have to start our day by going to that kind of muster point and getting the approved clearances for that. And as far as deciding if we go to those areas, a lot of that comes down to, one, what type of information are we looking to gather? Are we looking for this type of structure? Or are we looking for another type of structure? Excuse me. Are we also looking for if we want gradation of damage? And what I mean by that is, do we want really severe damage structures as well as very low damage structures? Or do we want to see like the worst of the worst? And so it comes into a little bit of planning with that. Some of it is also access, especially with things like hurricanes, where you can't get to some areas because it's all washed out. Some of it has to do with access. What can we feasibly get to? Some stuff that we can't feasibly get to, we do fly drones over. So, and that depends on if we can get the FAA clearance to do that. So there's that aspect as well. And so it's really the logistics boil down to, because it's an emergency area, it's a disaster zone. We're trying to time it with everything so we're not in the way, and what we're doing is still beneficial.
And then there's a lot of organizations, well, not a lot. There are a handful of organizations that are also working on getting to these same areas at the same time. Team Rubicon being one, and a couple of other kind of civilian disaster response type organizations. Do you share the data that you're producing with them in real time? Like, how does that kind of coordination work with that centralized incident management that you were talking about?
Yeah, we actually do. So most of our coordination happens on Slack, and we have people in that communication that are from FEMA that do some of their deployment groups. We have people who are from the Army Corps, and it's similar, and all those people are looped in so that we can kind of feed off each other's data and loop that all into each of our reports. And so it is shared, and that's one of the things I actually really like about it, is that the community shares all that information, and we actually try and coordinate together to see, okay, well, the FEMA MAT is getting this area. Sorry, that's a mitigation assessment team, I believe is what MAT stands for.
Yeah, a lot of acronym soup around disaster response.
I know. Please stop me if I forget an acronym.
Yeah, I think we mentioned EM earlier, which would be emergency management, right?
Yes. EM would be emergency managers. And so, yeah, all those groups do tend to coordinate in getting that data together. Yeah,
if you're a listener of another podcast that I'm on occasionally, and actually I should introduce you to them, the Disaster Podcast, they're more in the emergency management side of things, and it's always fascinating to hear how they use data from StEER. Like every time some big event hits, they get me on there and say, hey, what's StEER doing? What's the virtual assessment doing? Like, well, let me check Slack and see what's going on. And it's so helpful to have people like the Davids and yourself who are going out in these events, posting in real time on Slack as you're putting together the virtual assessment, as you're getting the physical field team together, to be able to share it out to other organizations who are interested and also deploying to the same areas to manage the response.
Yeah, I think one of the other groups that we overlap or try to, at least I know we use a bit of their damage assessments, is the National Weather Service, their damage assessment toolkit. And so the National Weather Service, especially for tornadoes, will deploy groups after the fact because they have to rate that tornado. And so they'll go out and take images. So we also coordinate with that. And I do like that StEER does that because it allows for a little more overlap in the atmospheric science area as well as the engineering area.
Yeah, or a lot of people may not know, if you're not into wind engineering and atmospheric science, like you can't rate a tornado by radar observations in real time. You have to assess the level of damage and calculate wind speed based on the masses of things like 2x4s and how far they crashed into things.
Yep, that's pretty much how we rate tornadoes. It has to do with how much damage did they cause and what failed, and how sturdy was the structure that failed.
Yeah, it's really, really important work. Every time StEER or the NWS goes out, it adds to our body of knowledge about how to respond to these events and how to build back better, hopefully, the structures that were there.
Yeah, exactly.
So as a really active StEER member, what are some of your thoughts and some experiences in just regards to extreme events reconnaissance in general?
In general, I find it kind of funny because when I was looking for what I wanted to do for an undergraduate major, what I looked up was it was right after Hurricane Katrina. And so I looked up, who did they send down after Hurricane Katrina? And it was civil engineers. And so that was basically what helped me decide on civil engineering. And so now that I do this, I kind of look back and think, oh, well, I made that happen. But I really enjoy being part of this group because I've learned more doing these reconnaissance events than I think I've ever learned from anything else, especially when it comes to how buildings fail. What are some of the common mechanisms we see? What are the things, even when I bought a house, what I ended up looking for and asking them to
It's really interesting. Like we just bought a house back in July in a seismically active area in the Pacific Northwest, and I asked, like, are there considerations that we need to take into account with that in Eugene, Oregon? They're like, not really. We're not close enough to the coast for you need to worry about that, or we're far enough away from the river where there's not likely to flood when the Cascadia subduction zone lets loose and backs up the Pacific into the Lima River. So like we asked about stuff like that, and it was really comforting to be able to know, hey, I could talk to Pedro up at Oregon State University, who is a tsunami expert, a coastal engineering expert, and guys like Joe Wortman, who's a civil engineering expert and an earthquake guy, and say, hey, what questions should I be asking when I'm buying a house in an area that I've never been to regularly and have never lived in? What questions should I be asking? And it gave us a really good feeling about the place that we ended up buying.
Oh, we did the same. We bought in North Carolina. I wanted to make sure we had hurricane straps, so extra resistance to hold our roof in place. And so when we had the engineer come out to the house to look at everything, I specifically requested that. I couldn't actually get up in the attic myself at the time. And so I was like, I need you to look for this thing. The only downside is I couldn't, in order for him to check for like how you anchor to the foundation, and if that's done correctly, we would have had to cut out part of like the drywall. And I was like,
Well,
How about that one?
yeah. And that's a really good point of, places where innovation is really needed for non-destructive inspection methods to check for things like that for homeowners. Because
Right.
not everybody wants to rip a hole in their drywall just to make sure the load path from their roof to the foundation is secure.
Yep. To make sure that something that should be secure is, but I'm sure in a lot of the cases when we've gone out and done these reconnaissance, people thought it was fine. And then we go and do the reconnaissance, and I'm like, not really.
Yeah.
They should have done this. But
yeah.
And I use those examples in my classes all the time from StEER whenever I've gone out, and I was like, if I find out any of you constructed one of these houses with this mistake in here, I'm gonna come back.
I'm gonna take your diploma.
I was like, Dr. Pilkington is gonna find you, and I'm gonna have words.
Yes, Dr. Pilkington's hit squad will come after you. Well, Stephanie, it's been fantastic chatting again, and really looking forward to seeing where things go with your career in StEER, and hopefully we'll run into each other soon at a natural hazards workshop of some sort. Where can people follow along with StEER and the work that you're doing as well at UNC Charlotte?
So for StEER, I recommend visiting their website, so StEER.network. And if you want to follow along with anything I do, I am on Twitter as PH Disaster. And
fantastic handle.
I know, it's great. And then I'm also on Instagram as PH Disaster _UNCC.
Awesome. We'll make sure to put links to all that in the show notes. Thanks so much, Stephanie. Really appreciate it. And have a great day and enjoy the nice weather out there.
Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode of Design Safe Radio. We really appreciate it. Smash that like button if you're watching this on YouTube. Hit that little subscribe button. That really helps us out and bring this message to more people who are interested in hearing about how our engineers and scientists are making our society more resilient to everything nature throws at us. A big thank you to our sponsors at the National Science Foundation. Our award number is 212-9782. And a big thank you to our program officer, Joy Kowski, who is excellent. And our team at the National Science Foundation's Network Coordination Office for NARI. Marty LaChance is our question writer and copy editor extraordinaire. Raquel Ruiz manages all things technical and editorial. And Morgan Glass is our social media coordinator. Big thank you to everybody at the NARI NCO and all of our experimental facilities. Thank you and have a great day.